Imagine for a moment that you have a really good pizza. After taking a couple bites, you want to share it. You ask a family member if they want a piece, but they aren't hungry and politely decline. But you insist. They absolutely must try this. And the pizza is healthy, or so you claim. They try a bite, but they were never interested in the first place. So when you aren't looking, they throw it in the trash.
Throw them in the trash.
Or worse, you're on the subway trying to share your pizza with a stranger that doesn't want it. No matter how many times they say, no, thank you, you keep trying to shove it in their face. That's what it's like being on the receiving end of someone trying to share their faith. All is fine if I'm interested, but if I'm not, then just leave me alone. So, Christians, when you ask why I don't simply respect your beliefs, this is why. Because you don't respect mine. Today, Elisa Childers and Greg Koukl talk about what to say when someone tells you that they are an atheist. I really wish they would ask themselves what they would do if they were atheists and someone told them that they were a Christian. And then they should follow their own good book's advice and do unto others. But alas, that is not their approach. So you, my dear viewer, must endure their advice, but with the added bonus of my dismantling it. Let's have a chat. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me, and especially to my patrons and channel members. Let's take a look at what is being shoved in our faces today.
So when an atheist, I think maybe there might be a little pivot we see among atheists, and maybe we can apply our tactical game plan to this idea.
Tactical game plan? We're only 7 seconds in, and you can already see what I mean about Elisa and Greg wanting to shove their faith in people's faces, whether they want to hear about it or not. The title of the video, How Should I Respond to Someone Who Just Lacks a Belief in God, clues us in as well. Elisa, how about just saying, cool, and move on? If they just told you that they lack a belief in God, it's likely in response to something that you said about your God. It isn't an open invitation to a debate. But I'm always up for a good debate. Consider this your invitation to continue.
So, and I've seen this a bunch where it used to be maybe that atheists were saying God does not exist. Well, now they've pivoted a little bit and they're saying, well, I simply lack a belief in God, or I just believe in one less God than you do.
It's not that atheists have pivoted. Atheists are not a homogenous group. We don't all believe the same things. We don't all hold to the same worldview, despite the claims of some apologists. This would be like me saying that Christians used to say that the Pope is infallible, but now they have pivoted. Now they say the Bible is the only inerrant source for what God has to say. Of course, you would point out that only Catholics hold to the inerrancy of the Pope, and then only when he claims to be speaking for God. But Protestants do not. They hold to sola scriptura. The Bible alone is the authority. It's the same with atheists. Some are lack theists. They lack a belief in any God. Me? I make the positive claim that the Christian God does not exist. I also say that as to any other gods, I do not believe that any of them exist, but I lack sufficient knowledge of such gods to be able to say positively that they do not exist. I consider it entirely possible that a God I know nothing of could exist. However, I also have no reason to think that that is true. It's not that I choose to believe that there are no gods, it's that I have no reason to think otherwise. I certainly don't believe everything that is possible to be true, as most things that are possible are not likely to be true, like fairies or unicorns. But I do know enough about the claims of the Christian God to make the positive statement that that God cannot and therefore does not exist. Does that help? That gives you a good picture of what I believe, and lets you know that not all atheists agree with me on this. Many of them don't care enough about the topic to consider it. They are too busy living their lives to care about what anyone thinks about their God.
They say, hey,
Mhm.
Christian, you have rejected all of this, the polytheistic religions, you've rejected the Hindu gods, you've rejected this and that. But I just believe in one, I lack a belief in one less God than you do.
I lack a belief in one less God than you do? No, Elisa. I believe in one less God than you do. You are confusing two different talking points. This would be like me saying Jesus rose from the dead on the third day of the Passover. See, the claim that Jesus rose on the third day and the celebration of the days of the Passover are two different things. That both have third day in them doesn't make them the same event. I've listened ahead about 5 minutes, and both of them get tripped up a few times with double negatives.
And it's almost like they've
Mhm.
pivoted to make room for them not to be making some kind of a statement about objective reality. But how can we
Mhm.
take our street smarts, our tactical game plan, and apply it to the atheist who would say, well, I just simply lack a belief in God?
Why do you even need a tactical game plan? How about just have an honest conversation? How about talk about what you believe and listen to what the other person has to say instead of trying to anticipate their talking points and having your script ready to counter it? The problem with Greg's approach is you are prepared for what you have anticipated, but not for what the person you are talking to might be thinking or saying. You then fail to engage in the conversation. If your goal is to reach the person you are talking to, rather than score points for being smart or well prepared, you aren't going to succeed. But if all you want is to think that you were right, go right ahead. But don't then claim to care about the person you are talking to. You clearly don't. You're in this for yourself, not them. On the other hand, go right ahead. You can go ahead and tell your God that you did your best, but the other person's heart was just too hard. Too hard for you or too hard for your God? If your God were real and you really could communicate with your God, there should be no such thing as an apologist or excusagist. If what you claim about your faith were true, you should be able to have your conversation with the atheist, and your God should be telling you in your heart what to say. Imagine if you had such a conversation. Imagine John is your atheist interlocutor, and John tells you that he lacks a belief in your God. And as you are thinking about what to say, in your heart, you hear God tell you that the reason John doesn't believe is because his pastor told him that DNA is like a computer code, and computer code doesn't just pop into existence without a creator, just as life can't pop into existence without a creator. And John, as a software engineer, knows that this analogy to be bullshit because he knows that DNA and computer code are nothing like each other. Next, pretend that your God is real and that there really is a good response to this, and your God gives it to you. So you respond to John, and he is astounded that you know this, as you weren't there. Clearly, your God is real because the only way you could have had this answer is for your God to have told you this. Isn't this far better than anything Greg Koukl could come up with? Even the fact that you are having this conversation with Greg tells me that your God isn't real. If he were, you should be able to pray and get these answers from your all knowing God, not from Fallible Fred, or Greg in this case. If your God wanted everyone to believe in him, as he claims, giving you all the answers that you need is in his best interests. He also claims, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future," Jeremiah 29:11. And we know that for all those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. If your God really meant these things and truly wants all people to know him and truly wants you to tell people about him, then giving you the words to say that will hit home should be a no-brainer. John learns that your God is who he claims to be, and your God demonstrates that he supports what you are doing in engaging in the conversation. But this isn't going to happen, is it? Because it doesn't work like this, does it? Leading me to think that either your God doesn't support your ministry or doesn't exist. The fact that you can't pray about this and get a clear answer, you have to ask Fallible Fred instead, is strong evidence that the God you claim to believe in doesn't exist. The fact that you are having this conversation at all is evidence that your God doesn't exist. I actually did this once when I was trying to witness to my mother. The answer I got in my heart was that there was nothing I could say that would reach her. I took that as God's word on the subject and gave it up. I should have seen that if there really were an all knowing God speaking to me and not my own thoughts speaking for God, the all knowing God should have been able to answer the question, should have been able to tell me something I didn't already know. But alas, when one prays to God, God seems only capable of reminding you of what you already know. Goodness, I'm only 49 seconds into the video and I've already proven that it can't possibly be about a God that is real. But what the hey, as long as we're here, we might as well listen to them bumbling through and trying to find answers that their God allegedly knows, but for whatever reason will not give to them.
Well, you actually conflated 2
Oh,
points
okay.
that I talked about it, and let me
Cool. Greg realizes she has conflated two separate talking points. One thing I'm wondering is if Elisa is working from a script. She looks down enough to make me think that she is, in which case she shouldn't be getting tangled in double negatives. But I could be wrong. She could be looking at something else, or possibly just general notes.
just take the second one is like, I believe in one, I disbelieve in one less no, I believe in one less
Lack of
God,
belief.
or however they,
Or,
put it.
yeah.
Now, Fallible Fred has gotten all tangled up too. It's, I lack a belief in God, and I believe in one less God than you. Got it?
I believe in one
I
less God than you, something like that.
something like that, but the point is you reject all these other gods, you don't believe in them,
Yes, I reject all those other Jods or gods or piffles or whatever it is you claim them to be.
and I don't believe in one more than you don't believe, and the implication is, and, Richard Dawkins has said this and others have used this, they think this is so profound.
I don't know if it's profound or not, but it is true. You reject all the hundreds of gods out there that aren't yours, and I just go one God further than you.
And so I my question at that point is, I affirm it. Yes, you're right.
Cool. So you get the point that you are a skeptic as to these other gods. Why do you not approach belief in your own God with the same skepticism? If you did, I don't think you would believe in your God. But because you excuse your God's failings, like his failings to answer atheist questions when you pray for answers, you are able to cling to a belief in a God that either cannot or will not demonstrate his own existence.
Why is that significant? They're trying to make a point here, and they think that, and basically some have said, "Well, you're basically an atheist too." All right.
Right.
But you just have one less God that you reject, and I reject them all.
If atheists are saying that you are basically an atheist, they are wrong. You are not basically an atheist. I think you have missed the point, however. It could be that it was argued badly to you, and that the atheist you heard this from was claiming you to be basically an atheist. I'll take your word for it, as I know there are atheists that have made bad arguments. Hell, I've done it myself. Not being an infallible being, I sometimes mess up. Like in a recent video when I said Tasmania was part of New Zealand. It isn't, it's part of Australia. I was corrected by a few Aussie viewers. The point should have been made to suggest that you use the same skepticism when evaluating the claims of your own God that you use when evaluating the claims of other gods.
Okay. And it's almost like they're equating all of these other gods and deities to the God of the Bible. And so I said, well, yes, you're right. That's actually the difference between an atheist and a theist.
And yes, I do equate your God to all others. I have no reason not to. Why do you not evaluate your God with the same skepticism as you do other gods? Why do you assume that your God claims are right unless proven otherwise? You don't do that with any other God. Why is the epistemic bar so much lower for your God?
If there is just one chance in a million that this is true, it's worth believing. Far from raising the bar or the epistemic standard that Christianity must meet to be believed, I lower it.
Is your God incapable of reaching the bar if you don't lower the standards for him? Could it be that no God could reach the bar because all gods are human made ideas?
That the atheist believes in one less God or whatever, however you put it, rejects one uh, all the gods, not just the.
Maybe I should call him tongue tied Tim instead of fallible Fred. Or maybe gullible Greg, who must believe and cannot look at the evidence with the scrutiny that he would for the claims of other gods.
So I want to ask him. Okay, so would you say that I'm basically a bachelor. No, you're married. But there's millions and billions of women that I have rejected and I'm not married to. I am just married to a bachelor is just married to has one less woman,
Right,
in
right.
his life. I'm trying to remember the exact words that
Personally, I think the words fail you because it's a bad analogy. I see where you are trying to go. A bachelor is a person with no wife. An atheist is a person with no God. A married person has one more wife than a bachelor, unless he has two or more wives. And maybe Greg has answered my question as to why he doesn't approach his faith with the same skepticism as other faiths, because he is married to this one. Just as a married man doesn't evaluate the qualities for a wife that his wife has, because he is already committed to her. So, too, Greg doesn't evaluate whether or not his God has the qualities needed to be God, because he is already committed to his God and he refuses to evaluate the relationship. But maybe it's time to do so. If your wife is breaking her marriage vows and shows no interest in the marriage, it's time to evaluate whether the marriage even exists. And if it is of no benefit to either of you, maybe it's time to part ways. Greg, when your God shows so little interest in a relationship with you that he won't even answer a simple question when you pray, the question of what to say to a particular atheist, then maybe it's time to reevaluate this marriage and if this marriage is even real. Maybe your God has abandoned you. If you can't tell if your God is there or not, and Elisa admits to these feelings at times in her book, Another Gospel, maybe it's time to apply some skepticism to your claims of a relationship with your God.
have in the Street Swords book. So does that mean I'm basically a bachelor? He said, no, you're married. I said, exactly. That's my point. No, that's not particularly profound. It's not a long conversation. It's just meant to show that this is a really silly thing to say.
It's only silly if you missed the point.
Yes, of course you believe in one less God than I do, or whatever, however you put it. But that doesn't mean that the God I believe in doesn't exist. And I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to equate all of these gods. You don't believe in Zeus, right? Because I have no reason to believe in Zeus.
Now you are starting to get it. I have no more reason to believe in your God than any other God. I get why you think you do, but why? What makes you think your God is any more real than Zeus? I get the impression that Greg thinks atheists disingenuous when we say that his God is just like other gods. He puts his God in a special category and thinks that atheists should too. Somehow we should examine his God differently than all the others. But why, Greg? Because that's the one you believe in? You don't give any more careful attention to Allah when talking to a Muslim. Why do you expect me to do that when you do not?
Why do you think that I believe in the God I believe in and not in Zeus? See, there's a question.
Yep, that is the question. Have an answer? I know he does. I don't know if he will give it here or not.
Oh, I don't know. There's no evidence or something to say, well,
Atheists should not be saying that there is no evidence for Greg's God. There is some. I find it illogical, inconsistent, and unconvincing, but I wouldn't say it is non existent. His God is non existent, but that doesn't mean there's no evidence for it. And if you're thinking, wait, how can there be evidence for something that doesn't exist? Think of it like children at the breakfast table. You see milk on the floor. Jane says that Susie spilled the milk, except you know that Susie is Jane's imaginary friend. You know Susie didn't spill the milk, but there is milk on the floor, and you do have eyewitness testimony from Jane that Susie spilled the milk. So there is evidence that Susie spilled the milk. Is it good evidence? No, you have the word of an unreliable child with an imaginary friend that she uses as an excuse to try to get out of trouble. But just because the evidence isn't good evidence doesn't mean that there is no evidence. It just means that the evidence is unconvincing.
oh wait, let me ask you a few questions. And by the way, I'm just moving now into another part of the book because a lot of atheists will say, well, there's no evidence for God. All right. Well, this is actually a very silly statement.
I agree with you that there is some evidence. Are there many atheists out there claiming that there is no evidence? I don't know. I am sure that there are some, but if it's so silly, why waste time on it?
Just because they're not convinced by the evidence doesn't mean there isn't evidence. For thousands of years, thoughtful people have been writing arguments regarding God. That's all evidence. It's not nothing, okay? But but I actually had this question once during a Q&A, and the question was, "Give me proof for God." It was actually a request, not a question. "Prove to me that God exists." Well, this is a hard way when people ask a question that way because they're asking for proof, and you don't know what amounts to proof in their
Mm.
mind, and you might ask for clarification.
Good point. If you don't know what someone will accept as proof, you might be wasting your time. In a trial, an attorney doesn't get to ask a jury this. That's part of the reason why trials take so long. The attorney has to anticipate what a jury will find convincing. But if your God were real, he should know exactly what will convince this person. And he should be able to tell you exactly what to say to this person that they will find convincing. That you can't do this tells me either that you aren't praying about your conversations and or these verses aren't true. Thus, you shouldn't even need to ask the person asking the question. You should be able to ask your God and know.
So, what do you mean by that question? So, when you say prove to me that God exists, what would count as proof to you? All right, that's a fair question, but I actually don't go there because what they're going to do is give me some bizarre kind of evidence that they would never require for anything else.
Of course, because you make the claim that your God can do all things. If your God can, in fact, do what he claims, it shouldn't matter how bizarre it is, provided it isn't logically incoherent, like being and not being at the same time, or making a rock so big that you can't lift it. Your God claims to be able to do it, a falsifiable claim. If he can't, he isn't who you claim he is. That you are balking at asking your God to do the impossible tells me that you don't think your God can do this either, or at least you don't think he will. Why not? If he really wants this person to believe, as he claims, he knows that this will convince this person. Why won't he do it? No matter how you answer that question, your God fails to live up to his own alleged claims. And once again, we arrive where I always end up: divine hiddenness.
So
Right.
I just I told him, I said, "This puts me in a liability because I don't really know what would be evidence for you or proof for you. Can you rephrase the question?" He said, "Okay. Yeah, I can. Can you give me any good reason why someone should believe in God?" "Okay, I can work with that. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" Okay. And I had this conversation with a student at the University of Toronto after my presentation. They came to the microphone. I said, "Okay, these first questions are pretty simple. Um, but just play along with me. Do you believe that things exist?" Now, the guy didn't want to bite because he knew I was going somewhere with it. So finally he said, "Okay, this microphone exists." And I said, "Okay, I can work with that. All right."
I get his hesitation. Usually, questions like this are intended as a trap. People who have a hard time thinking on their feet, which includes me sometimes, may not want to commit as you don't know where it's going. But this first question, yes, that's easy to commit to.
I agree with you. The microphone exists and other things as well. All right, the things that exist, whatever they are, have those things always existed or did they come into existence at some time in the past?
I don't know. I know the answer to many things, but not as to all things. For example, I don't know if energy has always existed or not. Do you consider energy to be a thing? Something has always existed. Whether that is energy or the singularity or something else, I don't know. But something had to exist when space time began. Let me guess, your questioner was flustered by your question, so score 1 point for Greg, but none for your God, as this also was unconvincing.
Now, this is the origin of the universe kind of question, but I'm just putting it in a very simple way. And you look at nobody believes the universe is eternal anymore. They used to 100 years ago. They don't anymore. The evidence is too strong for the origin of the universe. Christians believe in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and non-Christians believe in Big Bang cosmology. Now, I
Right.
understand some Christians are not comfortable with that. Don't get hung up on the word.
What was with the musical interlude there? Is this like a Trump town hall where you stop to listen to music? But Greg is right. We all must start with a brute fact. His brute fact is his God. Mine is the singularity. I consider my brute fact to be more logical as it requires fewer assumptions. His God requires that we assume the supernatural exists, that his God is a person. His God can act. His God can act outside of time and space, and his God can exist in a place outside of time and space. My brute fact asks you to assume that all of what exists today existed at the dawn of time, but in a different form. Somehow the singularity began to expand, bringing the dawn of space and time. How that happened, I do not know, but neither do I know how a God could create a universe, so neither of us can produce a mechanism by which our universe came about. But I think Greg does Christianity a great disservice with his claims here. He claims that Christians believe God created the universe in the beginning. Not all Christians think that. Some accept the Big Bang model, and many who think the universe was created by a God are not Christians. So painting this as a Christian versus atheist point of view is far too simplistic.
Here's the third question, and this is the one that really matters, okay? Um, what caused everything to come into existence?
I don't know, and you don't either. God did it is no more an answer than the singularity began to expand. I don't know how the singularity began to expand, but neither do you know how your God is supposed to have created the universe. Worse, your Bible claims that when your God started to create the universe, the earth already existed. If the earth already existed in a formless and void state before your God began to create anything, then your God didn't create ex nihilo. Your God cannot be the original cause of the universe, as at least some of it existed before he began to create. Worse, if time does not exist, your God can't begin to do something. It is logically incoherent to do something outside of time. Creation requires time. One cannot create time. If your claim is that your God can do what is logically incoherent, then he must also be able to create a rock so big that he cannot lift it.
Now, I said, I'll make it easy on you. There's only one of two answers, either something or no thing.
That's right.
I'll go along with that. I can't identify the something, but I'll grant that there was something.
That's it. Law of excluded middle, law of non-contradiction. You want to get all rational about it. That's it. So what do you say? Now, he doesn't want to say that something caused everything.
Why not? I have no problem with it. I wouldn't say it caused it.
It camp. It's going to have to be powerful. It's going to have to be personal. It's going to have to be, really smart to make the whole universe, whatever. So he doesn't want to go there.
But Greg adds this pile of assumptions on what is needed to start space and time expanding is just that, a pile of unsubstantiated assumptions. That his God requires all these assumptions to be able to do anything, by Occam's razor, makes the beginning of the universe less likely to have been created by a God.
But what's his only other alternative? His only other alternative is to say everything came from nothing for no reason and with no purpose.
No, you missed the possibility that the universe was brought about by something that wasn't a God. That you think that a God is the only way in which a universe can come into being tells me that you haven't looked into cosmology much. I haven't either, but I know enough to know that there are several theories among cosmologists, and none of them involve gods. That's not to say that no cosmologist is a believer. There are some that incorporate both into their views.
And incidentally, those all go together. If everything came from nothing, then there is no reason because there's no reasoner. And there's no purpose because there's no purposer. And now you're stuck with a whole nother set of problems that could be explored.
Why do excusagists want to go to the origins of the universe so much? This has nothing to do with their God claims. Even if there was a God that started the universe, even if I granted everything you've said so far, that doesn't get me to Christianity. There isn't anything in this argument that in any way indicates that the God needs to be your God.
But in any event, now he doesn't want this particular guy was stumped. He didn't know
Mm.
what to say because once you say everything comes from nothing, I mean, what that's worse than magic. You
Right.
know, in magic, you have a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Here you got no magician and you got no hat. You just got the
Yeah.
rabbit, the universe.
Interesting. Is this an admission that your view has a magician pulling a universe out of his hat? How does your view involve any less magic than the view of the universe popping into being from nothing? Not that I think that's what happened, but your view with a god did it requires magic. My view that a natural phenomena that I cannot identify set a chain of events in motion does not. Which is more plausible?
And so it's not the odds on favorite. And by the way, uh, this is what I'm trying to show. I am not trying to prove God's existence, though what I just offered some of your listeners will recognize as the Kalam cosmological argument. You don't need to know all that stuff. You just need to know, hey, a big bang needs a big banger, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
common sense. It's very simple. And as it turned out, this particular atheist, he obviously didn't want to go there. All right. And he says, well, I'm going to stick with a scientific answer, is what he said to me as he's
Mm.
walking away from the microphone. He's dismissing my point.
He is dismissing your point because you didn't make a point. You made a bunch of unsupported assertions. You asserted that a big bang needs a big banger, yet despite us having no experience with big bangs, as only one has ever occurred that we know of, and none of us was there to see it, you claim that it is intuitive that such a thing requires a God to do it, yet you cannot know this. You claim that this God must have the properties of your God. You can't know this either. Your questioner was rightfully unconvinced, as you said nothing to support your claims about your God. You believe them because they are intuitive to you. They feel right to you. Sorry, your feelings don't qualify as convincing evidence.
And my point being the odds on favorite is someone, not something, a someone, not nothing. All right. Which is
Yeah.
true. It is the odds on favorite. The smart money is on that. But he said, I'm going to stick with a scientific answer.
If that were true, most cosmologists would be theists, yet that is not the case. According to Pew Research in 2009, 43% of astrologers and physicists, that's as close as I could come to cosmologists, believed in some form of a god, as opposed to 94% for the general public. This paper claims that nearly all cosmologists are atheists. So if the cosmological argument really were as persuasive as you think it should be, of all people, cosmologists should be convinced, and yet they are not. The majority are atheists.
And I said, wait, you never gave a scientific
Right.
answer.
Yeah.
In fact, you can't give a scientific answer to that question because you have to have a universe already for anything like science to work.
And Greg shows his lack of understanding of the cosmological models of possible ways that the universe began. They do not begin with a universe already in existence. Your view, however, Greg, requires not only the universe to exist, but even the earth to exist before creation begins. You seem to be confusing the two positions here. And yet, when the questioner left, saying that he would stick with the scientific answer, he obviously was aware of that answer, but didn't repeat it to you. He was left with the scientific answer that he knew, and the answer of God magic from you, and he chose the scientific answer as the more convincing. Since you demonstrate a lack of understanding of the problem, that seems the more reasonable route to go.
I was interacting with him in a conversation, and I was using particular questions to lead to a point that was, yeah, I guess you might call it the mic drop moment, but that was the stone in the shoe. I didn't think I was going to persuade him, certainly not at the moment.
That's quite the admission. The best you can do, even with your mic drop moment. You do not expect to be persuasive? Why not? Could it be because you know that the Kalam doesn't even get you to Christianity? All it gets you to is a cause? I will grant you a cause. But to grant a cause, I don't even need to grant a God, let alone your God. If your God really does exist and really cares about what people believe and wants you to spend your life telling people about it, wouldn't you expect at a minimum your God to give you a convincing argument? Your God really needs to get in the game.
Get off the sidelines. Get in the game.
Get actively involved in telling people about himself. If he really existed, this should be easy.
It might be something he thinks about later, stone in the
Right.
shoe. But there were a lot of other people in the audience that were also listening to this engagement, seeing that he had no answer to the point I was
Mhm.
making, but I had an answer to it that made sense.
Did it make sense? Maybe it did to you, but it sure didn't to me. We are over halfway through the video, and the kalam is all you've given us. Is that all you've got?
Some will say, oh, I'm an agnostic. That's actually a point of confusion because they say, I'm an agnostic because I don't know that God exists. Well, agnosticism is not a knowledge category, it's a belief category. All right.
Mhm.
And that is the belief, that is the point of view that you aren't affirming or denying. Okay. And you don't have a view either way. And this is the what they're trying to do, the atheists, to escape any burden of proof for their view.
Wow. Greg makes the claim that all agnostics are disingenuous atheists. Agnostics are just atheists trying to escape their burden of proof. Has it never occurred to Greg that some people just don't care? What I find ironic is the number of Christians that tell me that as an atheist, I shouldn't join a conversation about theism as I have no dog in the fight. But Greg, on the other hand, says that if I stay out of it entirely, I'm being disingenuous. And Greg, you are wrong. Agnostics are not necessarily atheists. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, an agnostic is a person who believes that nothing is known or can be known of the existence or nature of God or of anything beyond material phenomena. A person who claims neither faith nor disbelief in God. I don't consider myself an agnostic, but plenty of people are. And I think Greg's real problem is that he doesn't know how to handle talking to a person that doesn't care what Greg believes. Greg can talk himself blue in the face, and all he'll get for his trouble is, so what?
So when
Right.
people say, well, I don't believe there is no God,
Those pesky double negatives. Greg, I think you meant to say when people say there is no God, not when people say I don't believe there is no God. Because the latter describes your position, and I don't think you meant to include yourself and fellow believers.
I just have no belief in a God. If I were an atheist, I would never do this because I actually think this is intellectually dishonest, and you'll see in just a moment.
It's not. It's also not an atheist. Continuing to conflate the two is like conflating the views of Catholics to be the views of Protestants. They are two different belief systems.
And so here's what I say to him. I said, okay, I'm going to make a statement, and I'd like you to respond to the statement, okay? And you have one of three responses. You can either affirm the statement, you can deny the statement, or you can withhold.
Hmm.
I don't know. I can't affirm, I can't deny. I'm just going to withhold. Okay, here's the statement. God exists.
Personally, I deny, but you just acknowledged that withholding is a valid opinion. Why are you about to go back on that?
So, do you affirm that? No, of course not. um, do you withhold? Because withholding is agnosticism. That means
Yeah.
you're not making a statement one way or another. All right? Well, no, they don't do that. Because if that were their view, they wouldn't be doing podcasts and writing books.
Right.
People who have no opinion about something don't write about their non-opinion.
Okay, but are there books and podcasts about agnosticism? When I Google agnostic podcasts, I get this list of the 15 best. The number one is C.S. Lewis. Really? C.S. Lewis is an agnostic? This one, Curiosity, is about life in general, and they say that they are somewhere between agnostic and mystical atheism. One is agnostic but has nothing to do with religion. One is a comedy channel, and one is a Bible study from an agnostic viewpoint. They couldn't even come up with 15 to fill the top 15 list. This one is the closest to what Greg is talking about, challenging Christianity. Challenging Christianity exists in that space between being all for and all against religion, joining us in asking the questions that challenge current notions of Christianity. As for agnostic books, here's what I get on the first page of my Google search. Many of these believe in some form of God or spirit. So again, no homogeneous ideology from agnostics. Greg, does one really need to be all in on being against you to join the conversation? Doubters are not welcome at the table? If you don't allow people who are undecided to have an opinion, then how can you possibly hope to persuade them to your side? On the other hand, go right ahead. Tell agnostics how disingenuous they are and how they're not allowed into the conversation until they pick a side. You will likely chase most of them to atheism, the more rational viewpoint.
They do have an opinion. It turns out that they affirm the statement that, that they deny the statement God exists.
No, the atheist does that. Maybe a few agnostics, but not most. Most take no position.
They deny the statement God exists, which is, by the way, they have no belief in God because they don't think he exists. So here's the key to keep in mind, and I go into more detail, of course, in the book here, is that they lack a belief in God, but they do not lack a belief about God.
Mm-hmm.
And again, Greg confuses two different positions. Lacking a belief in God is not necessarily the agnostic position. Many atheists lack belief in God. Part of the reason for this is it's very difficult to prove a negative. I can't begin to prove that no gods exist, partly because I don't know how many gods there are or what people's beliefs are about these gods. But the Christian God I know about. I know that what is claimed about him from a number of sources. Based on this, I make the positive statement that the Christian God does not exist.
They lack a belief in God, but they don't lack a belief about God. Their conviction about God is that there is no God, which is why they're called atheists.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Atheist means no God.
Very good, Greg, which is why agnostics are an entirely different category, and you should be able to understand that they are not the same.
A negative theist God, no God. They make it sound like it means no belief in God, but that's ledger domain. That's sleight of hand, verbal
Mm-hmm.
sleight of hand.
And agnostic means no knowledge. An agnostic doesn't say there is no God. She says she doesn't know if there is a God or not.
Okay. And so when you ask this question, you say, well, or you put it to them this way, if given this statement, what's your response? Well, then that forces them to be honest about their view. I understand that you have no belief in God, but the reason you have no belief in God is because you believe there is no God.
Yeah.
So you have a belief about God.
A person can have no belief in God and yet have a belief about the existence of gods. Just as I have no belief in intelligent extraterrestrial life, but I have a belief about intelligent extraterrestrial life. I don't think it's real, but I do think it's possible. That doesn't make me dishonest if I lack a belief in intelligent extraterrestrial life. Yet you think it dishonest when it comes to gods. Why is that? Further, you feel so strongly that one must have an opinion that you accuse anyone who disagrees of being dishonest. Seems to me that you are trying to force people into the camps that you want them to be in, and you want to eliminate any middle ground.
I have no belief about the best rugby team in England because I have no exposure to that. I
Yeah.
totally lack a belief about that. No
Mm-hmm.
opinion. Atheists don't lack a belief in God in that sense.
But agnostics do. Why do you insist on conflating the two?
Yeah.
They do not believe in God because they believe God does not exist. And that's what the questions there in Street Smart, how I just role played it for you, are meant to kind of unwrap a little bit to get the other person to be more honest.
And that's all we need to know about Greg's approach. He approaches the atheist with the ad hominem in mind that the atheist is a dishonest person that refuses to defend her beliefs. He has poisoned his own well and thus is incapable of an open dialogue on equal footing. He's decided he's already won and that he has the high ground. All he needs to do is reveal his position to convince the honest person that he has the only reasonable position, never even noticing that the person he's trying to share his pizza with isn't interested. And how can you possibly hope to engage with a person when you cannot even see where they are?
I see you.
Could it be that you think you can engage with someone you aren't listening to because you claim to engage with a God that isn't listening to or responding to you? Live your life.